Okay, I think we can start. Welcome to the first related to RTPK feature in Triumph LS product workshop, which is covering functionality of this feature, and will shed a light to whole process of using this feature in the field. My name is Eugene Aksionov. I am the moderator of this webinar, and today we have Shawn Billings, who is presenting this information, this presentation to you all. Before we start, I'll tell you what capabilities we're gonna have and what the plan of this webinar. As I said, this is the first one of series workshops, as we call it, webinars for Triumph LS product, and you have controls. You can ask questions through the question tool. You can raise your hand and ask a question by audio. We're gonna have a 45 minutes presentation and then 30 minutes question answer session. Video will be published and recorded on our media, and you will get a link to these materials. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media and see information on the website also. That's the plan. Let me introduce our presenter of this webinar. His name is Shawn Billings. He is professional land surveyor who has a lot of publications in professional magazines, and he is founder of Pendulum Surveying. He also was initially staying behind the Triumph LS product a few years ago when we started develop this product as a new direction in our technology. And we have good and long cooperation and experience with Shawn during these all years. So please welcome Shawn Billings. Shawn, please, that's your attention, to take your attention for this, for our audience.
Thank you, Eugene, and we'll get started, and just really excited about this presentation today.
Well, hello everyone. It's so great to see you all. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about RTPK. I love talking to surveyors, and I love talking about surveying, and that's exactly what we'll be doing, is talking about how RTPK can benefit surveyors. And what a privilege it is for me to be able to talk to you about RTPK. This concept is one that I know quite a few of us have been asking for really decades now, and to my knowledge, Javad is the first to bring a viable implementation of it to the market. And wow, it's just really incredible what it's able to do for something that's just so new and so fresh on the market to be so capable, robust. It really is exciting, and I'm really looking forward to showing you some case studies this morning of how RTPK can be used today. And it's a technology that's going to continue to mature. There are things that are already in the works to make it even better, but even today, right now, as you're about to see, it is really remarkable in just how capable it is. So we'll dig in and take a look at that. I want to thank everybody at Javad GNSS for putting on this presentation so that we can talk this morning about this RTPK. And I want to thank all the developers at Javad GNSS, because this really was a multi-faceted effort. Quite a few people were involved in making this a reality, and just such a beautiful job of putting this together, as you'll see here in just a moment. So without any more delay, let's jump right in and start talking about what RTPK is and what it can do for you. So what is RTPK? Well, it stands for Real-Time Post-Processed Kinematic. RTPK puts the post-processing software in the GNSS receiver. This gives the receiver the ability to post-process data in near real time. RTPK uses raw data from the rover as well as raw data compiled from the correction stream from the base to create a vector from the base to the rover. With RTPK, there is no need to download the raw data from the base, provided that corrections are available. These corrections can be from any base that transmits RTCM, including virtual RTN stations, and can be transmitted via UHF, spread spectrum, N-trip, or TCP. For this workshop, I'm going to be using a Javad Triumph LS Plus that will be connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot. I'm tracking GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, and Beidou, and the firmware that I'm using is JField 3.0.10.402. I'll also be using a Javad Triumph 3 with internal cellular modem and Verizon SIM card with static IP. The corrections are RTCM 3.2 MSM3 short, transmitted at a 1-second rate. The Triumph 3 is also tracking GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, and Beidou. RTPK is a paid-for option, so you will need to have an options authorization file to be able to use RTPK, and you'll need to update the OAF file in your Triumph LS or LS Plus to be able to activate that feature in the software. And then you'll also need to turn the RTPK feature on in the action profile that you'll be using RTPK with. And to be able to access that, you can use the compass button, or what I call the compass button, there on the top center of the collect screen or the action screen. Then in the action profile setup, you'll want to select options there on the left side. And then you'll want to enable post-processing on the device. There's also an option for prefer RTPK Solution. My preference is to leave that off and for the default to be the RTK Solution, and then in those instances that I want to use the RTPK Solution, that I explicitly set that to be the solution that I want to store, but for the default to be RTK instead of RTPK. Alright, so first we're going to do something kind of crazy. We're going to demonstrate what RTPK can do on a baseline of about 30 miles or 50 kilometers. We're going to go to the Harrison County Regional Airport and locate an NGS monument there. So let's check it out and see what happens. Well, as we begin, let's take a look at a few of the controls I have on the screen. First, this button is set to P delta, and I've got it set to show the distance to the base, which you can see is almost 52 kilometers. This button is set to post-processing. This is the RTPK white box button. You get to it by pressing and holding the white box that you want to select and hit that setups, and then click post-processing. Down below, we see this button is set to GNSS recording. It shows the epoch count as the raw data is recorded. With the current release of the GNSS firmware for the Triumph LS Plus, RTK is going to be difficult to consistently acquire at 50 kilometers without tuning the engine settings. Now, I haven't done this presentation for RTK. It's focused on RTPK, and it's not intended to demonstrate RTK performance at this range. So we probably won't see great reliable fixes at this range with RTK, but we're mostly concerned with the RTPK. So to begin, we're going to locate point 1, and we're going to give this an observation time of 180 seconds. So let's begin our observation by pressing the start button. So we've begun our RTK observation. We've logged a single epoch, and the receiver automatically went to float because this particular profile requires 10 matching fixes before it begins the averaging part of the observation. So it's going through that initial phase 1 process that Triumph LS users will be familiar with. For those of you who've never used a Triumph LS, this may seem a bit foreign, but it's a process where the RTK engines use these repeated fixed solutions to verify the fix initially before averaging is done. But as I mentioned earlier, because we're at 52 kilometers, the RTK engines are struggling a bit to get a fix, much less a repeated fixed solution. While all of this is going on, you see the counter in the bottom right, where that record button is counting up presently at about 70 seconds. And as it continues to record that raw data, it's also compiling a raw data file for the base from the corrections that are coming in. So you see up there at the top where it says 100%, we know that we're receiving those corrections via our TCP connection through cellular internet access. We're receiving those corrections and then compiling those corrections into a raw data file that the RTPK processor will be able to use in just a few seconds. So this first observation that we're doing, we're just waiting until it gets to the very end of our RTK observation at 180 seconds, and then it's going to process at that point. It will begin the post-processing at that 180 second mark. As mentioned earlier, the Triumph 3 and the Triumph LS Plus are tracking GPS, Galileo, GLONASS, and Beidou, but RTPK does not require all 4 of those constellations to be tracked. So for those of you that maybe have a Triumph LS with a Triumph 2 or a Triumph 1M or a Triumph 1, and you're only corrections available to you are GPS plus GLONASS only, RTPK can work with that. The time required will vary because of the difference in the available signals and data, with the additional signals and satellites that are available from Galileo and Beidou. You have a lot more opportunity for fixed solutions in shorter periods of time, but you can absolutely use RTPK with GPS and GLONASS only. So here I've manually stopped the observation at 180 seconds. We didn't have enough RTK fixes to get through the settings that I had by the time we got to 180 seconds. So I just manually stopped the observation, and then immediately RTPK begins post-processing. The user will be presented with the status bar that shows that progress is taking place. And then once an RTPK solution is acquired, the status of the solution is shown here. If an RTK position is also available, the residuals, or the difference between the 2 solutions, is shown here. So we'll go ahead and store that observation, and then we'll move on to point 2. Alright, for point 2, we're going to observe this one for 120 seconds. So I've begun the observation. We're about 14 seconds into it here. And now we have the distance to last white box is populated, and it shows about 25 centimeters in horizontal. This is based on the current single RTPK epoch that we have, comparing that to the previous solution that was stored, the RTPK solution. Okay, we're about 60 seconds in. We're going to let this go for about, like I said, 120 seconds. So we've got about one more minute. It may feel like time is being wasted here, but the great thing about it is even when RTK is not getting a solution, you're still working. Raw data is being recorded and prepared for RTPK to attempt to solve this position. All right, we've got about 20 more seconds. About 5 seconds. There we go. We'll go ahead and stop it here at 120. Then we get that progress bar showing that processing is being done. And now we have our solution. And we see the distance to last now with RTPK is much better, 4 centimeters. So now we have two solutions, RTK and RTPK. So which one is used? Well, the user can switch from RTK to RTPK in the point screen after accepting the point, or by switching from prefer RTK to prefer RTPK before accepting the shot. Point 3. Now we're going to observe for 60 seconds. So I've begun the observation, but the RTK engines are not fixed. We have a float solution. But again, raw data is being recorded, so even though RTK is struggling to get a fixed solution at this long distance, we've still got a solution potential through the raw data that's being recorded. Here we have one single RTK epoch, and our distance to last doesn't look too good, 1/2 meter horizontal and 1 meter vertically. Let's see what RTPK is able to do with this 60 seconds of data. Watch as we switch the solution from RTK to RTPK once the RTPK solution comes in. Now only 6 centimeters horizontal and a little less than 1 decimeter vertical compared to the previous position. So for point 4, I realize this is getting out of hand, but I can't help but wonder if 60 seconds worked, what about 30? So here we are at 30 seconds. I'll go ahead and stop the observation manually. We'll let the processor process, and of course it processes very quickly. But we do have a fixed solution, and it looks like we've got a very good distance to last to the previous location, so about 1 centimeter and 1 decimeter vertically. So 30 seconds looks like it's a viable amount of time for RTPK at this 52 kilometer, 30-mile distance. So let's try 20 seconds for 0.5, and let's see what RTPK can do with 20 seconds of data. This should go fairly quickly. Okay, and at 20 seconds, I'll go ahead and manually stop this observation. We don't have any RTK observation in this. No RTK fixed epochs occurred during that 20 seconds. So all we will have for this solution will be the RTPK solution. There was no RTK fix during this observation, so there are no RTK to RTPK residuals, but we do have the RTPK fix. Now then, for 0.6, if 20 worked, let's try 10. Let's just see how low we can go. So 10 seconds in, I manually stopped it, clicked over to 11 seconds. So you see that processed very quickly. There was just such little data. But look at that distance to last, only 2 centimeters to the previous shot. Looks like that's going to be a good fix. All right, well, let's see what we can do with about 6 seconds worth of raw data. I have to admit, this seems like it's getting kind of ridiculous, such a short amount of time for such a long distance. But when we switch to RTPK for our solution, look at that distance to last, about 2 centimeters. Was that a fluke that we were able to do that with only 6 seconds? Let's do it again and see if we can repeat the success. Let's switch it over to RTPK, and then we see that distance to last again, about 2 centimeters from the previous observation. So now let's look at some statistics and see how these 8 observations that we have compared to one another as a group. The top left is in meters, and then the bottom right is in feet. The same statistics, just in different units, depending on your preference. But what we see is that 100% horizontally of these 8 shots, regardless of whether they had 6 seconds of raw data in the result or 3 minutes of raw data in the result, all of them were within 3 centimeters or 1/10 of a foot horizontally from the average. And then vertically, we had 100% fall within about a decimeter or 3/10 of a foot. Just really amazing for this sort of a distance to have that kind of consistency shot to shot to shot, 8 points, with that sort of agreement with one another. And this is not the first time that I've done this test at 52 kilometers. Previously, when I'd done this test, I saw very similar results. So this, I don't believe, is a fluke in any way. It's just a testament to the capabilities of RTPK to get a solution at a very long distance with very little raw data to work with. And since this was a published NGS monument, we can also look at the comparison of our average to the mark. Now, my base was set up using coordinates from a 3-hour depots observation. And the coordinates for these NGS monuments, I believe, were determined from raw data from several years ago, and the coordinates continue to be updated based on estimates of their velocities. So not based on current or any kind of new observations. So there's probably some bias in the model and the estimation, and we'll look into that at the end of this presentation and see if we can come up with a better idea of just how precise these long-range observations are not just with one another, but in a very real sense, the actual accuracy of those observations. But what we see here in the top left is meters and bottom right is in feet. We had about 5 centimeters or 17 hundredths of a foot horizontal between the average of those 8 points and the published coordinates as measured from my base, which was based on a 3-hour depose observation. Horizontally, again, 5 centimeters or 17 hundredths, and then vertically we're looking at right at a decimeter or about 34 hundredths of a foot. All right, I don't know about you, but I was pretty impressed with those results, particularly with such short data sets. Now we're going to go to the East Texas Regional Airport, to a government station that's located there. This mark is about 12 kilometers from our base, about 7 miles, and we'll see what RTPK does in maybe a more normal, everyday baseline length. So now we're on our new monument at the East Texas Regional Airport. We'll call this point 9, and we'll observe it for 60 seconds. Now this time we have good RTK solutions coming in as we're much closer to our base. We see the change in the distance to the base using that P delta, that we're now 12.6 kilometers from the base. Observation will be complete in about another 20 seconds. 10 seconds. And now we're doing our post-processing. So with the processing complete, we see that we have really low residuals between RTPK and the RTK solution. I'd also point out here the graphical depiction of your residuals. You see on the left side where the horizontal scatter plot is, a red star, which is the RTPK solution, over the green square being the RTK solution. So graphically, you can see how those agree. And on the right side, you see the vertical representation of these residuals, where that green line is the average of the RTK solutions, and then the red line above it is the RTPK vertical solution. So horizontal and vertical depicted by the numbers above the scatter plots, and then in the scatter plots depicted graphically. Now we'll try using the RTPK white button, and I'm going to use that button to process the RTPK solution at various times throughout the RTK observation instead of waiting until the very end of the RTK observation. So maybe there are times where we really don't know how long or how much raw data that we need to be able to process the solution. So what we can do is, as I have here at 20 seconds, go ahead and click on that RTPK start button and let it process. And here we see that already, with only 20 seconds, that we have a really nice RTPK solution that matches the RTK solution that we've got. And because of this, it gives us an additional layer of verification, or perhaps even a layer of verification that replaces previous verification tools that we've used in the past. And you can continue this over and over. So maybe the 20-second observation in a particular environment would not have been enough data to process, maybe in a bad environment, canopy or something like this. So you just continue to allow raw data to be recorded, and you click on the button, and when it processes, once it gets to a solution, the most recent solution replaces the previous solution. So now the 20-second solution is gone, and is now replaced by the 60-second solution. But you can continue to do this over and over as you like. And once you feel satisfied that you have a good solution, you could just manually stop and store the observation. So this gives us the potential to save a tremendous amount of time in the field. We can continue to do this over and over again until we feel confident that we have the right post-processed solution. Or for that matter, the post-processed solution can verify that we have the right RTK solution. So now I did it again at 128 seconds. It's going to process. And you know, really this contrasts so nicely with post-processing from the past. Before this, where you could post-process while you're standing at the point, literally, you know, a user would often log much more raw data than necessary because they knew if they came back to the office and processed that data with too little raw data, that the expense of going back and occupying that point was just too great, and that it was worthwhile to log additional data. But now it's unnecessary to log that additional data because you can really tailor the observation to your current circumstances. So at the very end of RTK collection, it's going to go ahead and process. Now, if you're pleased with the results that you've got, you could go ahead and accept now before it processes that last bit of data. You're not obligated to process this last bit of data, but that is the process that it goes through automatically. And again, we see that we just have really nice agreement between RTPK and RTK. So as I mentioned earlier, we can use that RTPK white button to process well before the end of the observation. And if we're pleased with the results of the RTPK and the RTK that is currently available, we can just go ahead and stop and store. So the profile that I've got right now, I've got it set to require 180 seconds for that RTK observation. And we're going to post-process at 10 seconds. And I get really good agreement between RTPK and the RTK observation. So I'm confident enough to go ahead and store the observation, even though I would have 170 seconds left for that RTK observation if I let it go to the end. But because I can see that RTPK and RTK are in agreement with one another, I have that confidence to go ahead and stop and store the point, depending on what my needs are for that point. And now we'll do that same thing again. I'm going to let it record for about 10 seconds and then use that start RTPK white box to begin processing and see if I can get a solution that matches my RTK. And if I do, which I did, I'll just stop and accept that observation as is. So now we're going to change things up a bit for this last observation. We're going to observe for 180 seconds, but we're going to use a feature called Boost Verify Speed. And I'm going to show you how to access that and where to make the changes to the software. But what this is going to do, instead of requiring the user to intermittently press that Start RTPK observation button, this is going to automatically do that. It's going to automatically begin processing on the intervals that we establish in this Boost Verify Speed. So first, before we begin our observation, we're going to make some changes to our configuration. And particularly, we're going to be changing the action profile. So to access that through a shortcut, you can click on this, what I call the compass button. It shows the orientation of the receiver there at the top center of the action screen. Pressing that will bring up the action profile settings. And the settings that we're going to be changing in particular are under verification. And there at the bottom right, you'll see boost verify speed. And for today's purposes, we'll be looking at analyze RTPK residuals. Analyze RTPK residuals. We're going to set the RTPK auto start period to 30 from never. And that's going to start that automatic processing every 30 seconds. And now as we start the observation, you'll notice that the RTPK white button begins a countdown timer. Instead of showing start, it begins counting down to when the RTPK will be automatically processing raw data again. And at 30 seconds, processing begins automatically. So with 30 seconds of data, RTPK reports a fixed solution. The residuals to the RTK position are good. Everything looks good there. And now that we have that Analyze RTPK residual setting turned on, you'll notice that a thumbs up is given, which indicates a reliable solution. So it makes it to where you only have one place to look on the screen to know whether RTPK and RTK agree with one another. And then you'll notice that the counter continues to start over each time the processing begins. So here we'll start processing in another couple of seconds. All right, it took about 20 seconds for it to process that, and so there were about 10 seconds left before the next automatic processing. And then it begins again. And this is probably a good time to mention that when you set that interval for the automatic processing, you want to keep in mind that the processing takes more time the longer this data set goes. So that 30 seconds is about right for a 3-minute observation, but if the observation goes much beyond that, you probably want to use the 60-second or 120-second setting so that there's plenty of time for the processing to be done, for more data to start. Otherwise, you'll be processing all the way up beyond when the next interval is supposed to start processing. So kind of keep that in mind when you set this interval for processing. And this is true of the current release version. Future releases will probably address that, but for now, it's something to be aware of. And here we are at the 3-minute mark, and it processes again at the very end automatically. And as we've said before, we could go ahead and accept the observation before the post-processing is finished, or let it process out with all of the raw data that it's collected to date. So as we did with the previous monument, let's do some statistical comparisons between our measurements and the published position of this monument at the East Texas Regional Airport. Again, top left is in meters and the bottom right is in feet. And we see that we had about 4 centimeters horizontally between the published position of the monument and what we measured coming from our depot's observation with the 3 hours of raw data for the base. And then vertically we see that we had just a little bit less than 2 centimeters, or about 6/100ths of a foot, in difference. As we turn to the statistics, we had 5 points of varying duration, and we see that the 100% of these 5 observations were within 13 millimeters horizontally of the average, or 4/100ths of a foot horizontally from the average. Vertically, we had about 34 millimeters from the average or 11/100ths of a foot. Now, what I find interesting is perhaps there's a bias in there, something that's really not telling us our true accuracy, because maybe the model for the movements, the velocities, is off a little bit. So what happens if we were to compare a direct inverse of the two published coordinates compared with an inverse of our average position coordinates of those two monuments? And what we see here is really incredible. The inverse between these two monuments is almost 40 kilometers, as can be seen there. And the difference in the baseline is less than a centimeter. So just really, really amazing once we pull the bias out between true NAD 83 2011 EPIC 2010 and what that estimated position of NAD 83 2011 EPIC 2010 would be. And we look vertically and we see a difference of about just a shade under 9 centimeters, a little bit less than 1 decimeter. So again, I think this gives us a better picture of the precision that we were actually able to achieve with these very short static observations over these long lines. Well, it's been a real treat to be able to share this workshop with you and to be able to put this information together. I was surprised by a lot of the findings myself. Every time I use RTPK, it seems like I'm discovering something new, some better capability that it has. One thing I would like to just say in closing before we go to your questions is one of the questions I had several months ago for our developers was, which is better, RTK or RTPK? And their answer, which has been borne out from my experience as well, is that neither is better. There are times when post-processing is simply a better tool. And then there are other times where RTK is a better tool. And often it's impossible, at least for me, to be able to judge which is going to be a better tool in a given environment. It's just sometimes things happen where one winds up being able to give a solution where the other one can't, or can't do it as efficiently as the other. So from my vantage point, I would just prefer to have both in my toolbox and not be left without either one. So if you don't have RTPK, I would highly encourage you to consider it. It's very economical, I believe, for what it does. Very well priced. And I would also say that if you don't have a Triumph LS or LS Plus, I would highly encourage you to get one of those so that you can take advantage of this RTPK software. And with that, I guess we'll go to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn. Yeah, we can start questions, and we have already a few questions posted through registration procedure. I have 4 questions. Perhaps this presentation already answered on some of them, but let's go through questions that we already have, and then we start answering on questions that you post during the webinar. So Shawn, if you can walk through these questions yourself, please do it.
Absolutely. So a few of the questions that we had, one was, which is the better solution between RTK and RTPK? And that's a good question. I think it's going to vary depending on the situation. Here we saw on that long baseline of 52 kilometers that the RTPK was superior to RTK. In instance, I have found in instances where maybe the canopy was somewhat moderate and I had a short observation time, that RTK was superior to RTPK. So very much situations will change on which solution is better. So it still, I think it depends or requires the user to have some discernment as a surveyor to apply their professional knowledge to make good decisions about which solution to select.
Andrea Antonov is asking about the Javad receiver. For your opinion, is it not clearly asked actually, or is it a favorite receiver in the company, or is it the best receiver? So you probably can tell a couple of words there.
Yes. So from my perspective, the Triumph LS Plus is just an amazing receiver, both for RTK and now with RTPK. The 4 engines that we have available in the Triumph LS Plus, they're able to work with the multi-constellation data in a way that just has never been done before that I can see. So it's an amazing step up from what we had before. The Triumph LS basic or standard Triumph LS, when it came out, was amazing in its performance, but the Triumph LS Plus is a completely different system. Even though it looks the same on the outside in many ways, internally it is just a completely different machine.
I think we should confirm that Jesper Gill actually asking about the number of epics in the solution for RTPK, but the presentation, I guess, answered on this question. There is clearly shown how many epics we have to store for solution.
Right, and you know, the situations will change, particularly if you're working around canopy, and that's where that ability to continue to process over and over again at the press of a button, or using that automatic RTPK setting, the user can continue to monitor those solutions and see if they feel like they've got enough data for that particular location. So the number of epics will vary depending on your baseline length and the environment that you're working in, but with the ability to see that solution while raw data is still being recorded, you can process and see what that result is. And if you're confident with the result that you have, then you can stop and store. And if you want to continue to record more raw data, you certainly can. But to see that I could repeatedly get a fixed solution, a good fixed solution with 6 seconds of raw data at 52 kilometers, I was not expecting that when it happened, but it's an amazing just how little data is required to have a good solution.
Okay, let's then follow 2 questions that we received during workshop today. Kai is asking also that features that you demonstrated, actually he was looking for before, and he is asking, is it released in software or it's not released to you? So you can, I'll give you a chance to answer yourself on this question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So the version of the software that I was using for this presentation is the current release version as of January 28th of 2021. This RTPK, it's very mature right now, but there'll be a lot of future improvements and enhancements. But yes, what I demonstrated today is the current release version.
And I sent an answer to Kai also about the next feature, because we have a new generation of RTPK engine for the next release, and probably you can comment that. I don't know. Is it while they're asking, we can tell a little bit more about the future.
Right. So the next evolution in RTPK, the developers have set it up to where it will process parts of the raw data file independently and then compare those solutions and use those comparisons to help verify that the RTPK solution that is given to the user is verified. So we'll process the first 90 seconds and then the next 90 seconds and then the next 90 seconds. And that may change. It may wind up being 2 minutes or something like that. And this will all happen in the background, so the user won't necessarily be seeing that part of it, but they're going to process different parts of that raw data and then compare the solutions and be able to determine that that solution is good because the solution keeps repeating as different parts of that raw data are processed. So again, it's just going to continue to improve. Another thing that's coming soon will be the ability to process your raw data when communications are unavailable, when you don't have those corrections coming in, and you return back to your Javad base and download that base. So now we have the raw data for the base and we have the raw data for the rover, and we'll be able to process that from the point screen of the Triumph LS of JField and be able to get the solution even though we didn't have those corrections streaming in for the RTPK to work in that real time.
And there's a question from Gerardo Gonzalez about is it possible to use RTPK solution with a course base station? I guess he means corrections from the base station. If I'm wrong, Gerardo, you can just make more details about this, and perhaps I was it is not enough that I answered to you that it's possible, but it's the idea is to have corrections, and that's only we need for RTPK.
That's right, and even with virtual base, so in RTN's reference stations where we have that virtual reference station, we can still take that RTCM correction and create a raw data file from that virtual base and post-process that as well. So it's very agnostic when it comes to what type of base correction is used. So long as it's an RTCM correction coming in, then we can use RTPK to process between that correction and the rover position, rover raw data.
Okay, it seems Gerard is satisfied by our question.
All right.
The question. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for joining us, Kai.
It's great to see you.
Okay, it seems we are not going to have more questions, but you still have a time to ask them. And I will let you know that you're gonna have a recorded video by email link, and you need to watch our YouTube channel and website, where we are going to publish it most likely tomorrow. Post your questions to our java.com question system, which always available to you. If you have anything to ask, you can join, of course, the second webinar that we're gonna have in a few hours. If something is not clear at the moment. Also, we have a support forum, support.java.com, which you can find useful for details about this feature and other projects that we have. There are many professional surveyors like Shawn discussing these subjects, and you're gonna have very qualified help from this source. So far, we have one more question from Denis Haritonov. Yeah, Shawn, please welcome answer to the question about difference quality between RTK and RTPK accuracy.
Right. So from my perspective now, this 52-kilometer example is an exception, but in more normal operating ranges, I don't really see a lot of difference between the RTK accuracy and the RTPK accuracy. Generally, they seem to be equal in accuracy from my vantage point. So when I'm making that selection between one or the other, oftentimes I'll select RTK just because I'm more familiar with RTK right now, but in coming months it may change to where I go to selecting RTPK more often. But for now, I don't see any real significant difference in the accuracy between RTK and RTPK. Eugene, have you don't you think that's kind of been the consensus from what we've heard from the developers and from surveyors?
Probably we have mentioned on some questions that we also received for states webinar. Maybe there are some interesting things that our European public should know also.
We've covered most of the questions, I think, even with the questions that were asked here. Probably the one question that I see that maybe I could probably explain a bit more is when to choose RTPK over RTK. And in the Triumph LS and LS Plus, there are verification tools that demonstrate that the RTK solution is reliable. When we look at that example from that 52-kilometer observation, we didn't, as I recall, I don't think I had any RTK observations that went through our full verification process. So in that case, particularly if I can repeat that RTPK solution and show that from one observation to the next I had the same answer, I would choose the RTPK over the RTK, because the RTK simply wasn't able to prove that it was a good RTK solution. And then I also, when I'm working in Canopy, I'll use that distance to last if I'm collecting points that are fairly close together, and I look at that distance to last to kind of show that the solution that I have, the position that I have, is reasonable. So if I look back and I see that, I'm within a half a meter in elevation from the last point that I collected, but RTK is reporting a 3-meter elevation change, then I know that RTK solution is not good even before it goes through that verification process. But if the RTPK matches up with that distance to last, then I may select that one, the RTPK then. So mostly the times where I'm going to select RTPK over RTK has to do with my confidence in that RTK solution. If I don't have confidence in that RTK solution or have reason to doubt that RTK solution, then I'll probably prefer the RTPK solution.
Thank you, Shawn. I think about the upgrade of Triumph LS to Triumph LS Plus. I can answer to Denise that it's required to send to factory. You need to put upgrade order from website. It is that easy as upgrade any option. And also I want to mention that RTPK option itself is non-free option in the release, and you should have ordered this option and upgrade this option through the website. It doesn't require anything to sending force them back the unit to factory, just software option which will be available to you immediately after accepting the upgrade order from you. We have Cinderella program which actually helps you even try the option. You can submit upgrade order and mention that you need to try this for a reasonable time. We will consider these orders and give you ability to check how that works on the practice. It doesn't mean that the RTPK option is the only that you can use in your life as a surveyor, and still without RTPK option, our receiver works in RTK mode with backwards compatible in this matter, and you can do it still, but for the heavy canopies and very crowded environment, yeah, that's kind of safer for the point which Shawn demonstrated, I believe, already.
And just to highlight what you just said, Eugene, about RTPK, it works on the Triumph LS standard version and on the Triumph LS Plus. So I highly recommend the upgrade from LS to LS Plus, but it's not necessary for RTPK to be able to work. You can get that on the standard LS.
I probably also mentioned that Triumph LS Plus has more signals receiving than Triumph LS. It is, just to highlight the difference between units, and performs better than Triumph LS. So those who really don't want to waste the time on the point, you probably need to consider upgrade physically Triumph LS to Triumph LS Plus. That's outperformed the previous version, of course.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, then I think we should finalize our workshop for today. We gonna have more workshops about Triumph LS in future, and we will mix probably with different workshops also. So track our website news, subscribe to our newsletter, and be up to date for events that we have on the website and in the internet and in the media. Thank you very much for everyone who joined us today, and see you later on the next events. Goodbye, guys.
Goodbye.